Karl, how have you been, my friend?
Hey, I've been very well. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Oh, and the pleasure is mine actually to have you in first of all the book, but also in this interview. And I know you guys must be extremely busy because I'm sure people following Alyne, they probably also noticed that there was some merger fever in the market. And I
Yeah,
believe you're now part of the Tech group, right?
absolutely. Yeah. So a few months ago, the guys from Tech reached out, and we were starting to have a conversation on our vision for, where RegTech, where GRC as a larger topic is going. And they said, well, we kind of have a vision that we're coming from the legal tech space, so they do a lot of case management, matter management
Mhm.
traditionally, and they say, well, where we think that this leads us is to broaden across the second line of defense, and we're looking for a platform on which to sort of develop that vision, and we need someone to drive that vision forward. Would you be interested? And after a couple of conversations, it was an offer that wasn't easily refused. Let's put it that way. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, we're now officially part
Congratulations.
of Tech. Yeah, thank you.
That's super nice. But well, I think you managed to get more tricks out of your sleeve, to be honest, because you managed really well to combine a couple of buzzwords, and I thought
Yeah,
it was important in the Black Book to cover ESG, but then you actually brought in operational resilience. And I think
yeah.
after COVID, this is something that is all on the top of our mind. But explain us a little bit, how can you bring those two together?
Yeah, so I mean, arguably, they are the two main buzzwords in RegTech right now, right? So operational resilience, obviously, kicked off by the FCA a few years back, and it's all about retaining a service even in light of a adverse effect, right? So it's beyond what we traditionally did in business
Mhm.
continuity and saying, oh, if this hard disk fails, and I have three others because they're RAID level X, and we're all happy about that, right? It's going
Been
further and
there, done
saying,
that, right?
correct. Yeah. Now you're saying, look, I'm a customer. I walk up to a cash machine, regardless if we have a pandemic or an outage in a major building, cash should still come out of the cash machine. So that's sort of the one element. And then obviously ESG. I think especially with the COP26 climate summit going on, it is the top story around the world, and obviously the regulatory implementation of that is ESG management, which obviously goes far beyond purely climate and actually more social and governance aspects as well.
Yep.
So you've got
Totally.
these two buzzwords. And quite frankly, if you think about it, how would you address one without the other? How would you know how to be resilient if you're not thinking about the economic, the ecological, the social, the governance aspects that might be creating those adverse effects? So bring them together makes common sense, but it also makes organizational sense if you think about the people that need to be responsible for it. And that's sort of some of the thinking that we put into the article in the book.
Yeah, I like that. The hypothesis that you brought in the very early part of the conversation. It's good. It's good. And it does make sense to me as well. And talking about operation resilience, I think you brought it to a next level. Huh? Um, do you see that the banks did a good job in that, or do you still see there's room for improvement? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think the UK banks had a head start, right? So, Bank of England, FCA have been harping on about this for quite a while now, and so I'll leave it up to the regulators to say have they done a good job or not.
Mhm.
But it's certainly a focal point, and so you see that a lot in the audits, in the audit focuses, and I think everyone has their homework, and there's a lot of investment there. I think the rest of the European Union, there's the Digital Operational Resilience Act coming out. So, probably people are a little bit earlier in their development, especially if I take the example here in Germany. There were some regulations such as the BAIT or BITE, which led, I'd say without saying operational resilience, certainly led organizations in that direction,
Mhm.
that you need to address, for example, an entire stack from service to underlying technology and address your protection need and your criticality of that,
Yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah.
sort of, your first step towards operational resilience. So I think we all still have a bit of runway ahead of us for the operational resilience topic.
Yeah, and honestly, Karl, I didn't want to put you on the spot by judging on the banks. What was on my mind while asking you the question was, I think banks did a particularly good job actually in the whole COVID crisis, because
Oh, yeah.
it actually showed that by having these mechanisms in place, as you mentioned, yeah, they could recover quite easily and actually managed maybe better than other industries from the situation that we're having. I mean, yes, there have been audits. Yes, there has been limited kind of operations, but not for a long time, actually.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. I mean, I'm not entirely certain if I would say operational resilience practices are what made banks resilient as part of the COVID response. I'd more say that, well, let's take it from two sides, right? On the one
Yeah,
hand, BCM has been a huge practice in banks for a long time. They're good at
absolutely.
it. I met a guy from Deutsche Bank who said, you know what, I was responsible for BCM at 9/11 when our tower was hit. Our systems did not go down for a second, even though the data centers were crushed under the rubble, right? So they can do that. I'd say, on the other hand, probably the COVID crisis was a crisis that was particularly well fit for the financial services industry, right? Because apart from maybe the trading room, everyone can work at home, and people bought more, I don't know, VPN licenses, and they were good to go, right? So I think there are crises that could hit the financial industry harder than a pandemic. And obviously, as horrible as the pandemic was for many, many people around the world, I think overall from an industry, probably the banks did all right.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. No, I agree with you. At the end of the day, because the fact they had best practice to work from home, it was a rather simple thing to do. It was more of a technical adjustment, really, more than anything else. Of course, we're looking at from a more an industrial banking perspective. If you really go back to the end user, there's obviously been a large digital transformation that happened due to all this, which is also kind of triggered by this. But yeah, you bring in ESG. So what you really mean is that it takes two to tango, right? You need the two in order to be successful. But would that then mean which would be the most dominant in those two? Because if it's about business resilient, and I know it's gonna sound strong, but it's sometimes also about survival.
Yeah.
So I would think that this bringing those two together, it can be a very tough combination sometimes.
Well, I think that to bring it back also to sort of the COVID conversation, right? In any good operational resilience, or if you take it back sort of a little bit longer, BCM, the number one list of examples of threats that you analyze in your business is a global pandemic, right? I mean, it's probably even in the templates. So, anyone who says, oh, we never expected this, is clearly doesn't know what they're doing or is lying, right? So I think the challenge that we're facing is obviously to understand what are the more complex things that we might be facing over the next few years that are truly unprecedented, right? And the structure of thinking about that and understanding what impact that has, not just on my business, but on my credit side, right? Of all the investments that I'm doing, maybe even on my sales side and how my customers are going to react to different products that are comprised of different ESG affected products, right? That's the art, right? That's what we need to get into now. And so to be truly operational resilient, you certainly need to understand the threats that are coming your way. And that's exactly the mission that ESG does.
Mm-hmm. Does that bring me to the framework as well? Because there's quite some bit on the article around the framework. Can you explain us a bit more about the framework that you guys have set up around ESG?
Yeah, so I think when we started looking at ESG, we said, look, clearly this is where risk management is going. This is the next big thing. And so we said, well, how can we be a contributor? How can we, set the tone for what's happening in ESG risk management?
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally, if you come from like, cybersecurity management or operational risk management, there are frameworks, right? So you can go and say, I want to do cybersecurity, so I'll take a look at ISO 27001. I want to do privacy, I'll take a look at GDPR, right? So you have those sort of references of how to structure what are the things you need to look at. If you go to ESG, and I'm happy for any listener or reader to correct me, I haven't really found anything that puts that same structure in place, right? You have, for example, the United Nations that set the 17 sustainability goals, which are great, but they're very, very high level.
Yeah.
If you're, you need to measure your ESG risk exposure for a complex financial asset. There's the EU risk taxonomy from the European Banking Association. We've got, some different starts, but they all remain very vague and have examples as opposed to a defined framework. So we said, you know what, we're going to go out and we're just going to understand more about this space and then put some deep thought into it with some really smart people and come up with a taxonomy. So we developed and analyzed different mega trends. And so we said, what are the big trends that will affect us in 5, 10, or even 50 years? And we came up with a bunch of them, and then we broke it down to more than 310 data points. Right. So what you can now do is go and look at an asset, be it your own business, be it a investment object, be it something that you on your credit side, and say, let's think about the mega trends that might be affecting it. So just to take an example, rising fuel prices or emission costs are probably going to affect a SaaS business less than ExxonMobil, right? As an example. So you go through and select the big mega trends that might be affecting you, and then go and drill down deeper and find answers based on some of the questions that are in the framework, and understand, all right, what does this actually mean for my risk exposure? And then you can even break it down and say, okay, I'm going to hold this asset for maybe a decade. So what are the trends that are going to affect me for a decade? And so you can, ignore things that might happen in 50 years, but things that are going to happen in 5 years are highly your focus. So that's what our framework is all about.
No, and that's great, because I do believe that within ESG, the biggest challenge at the moment is measurement. Because you mentioned taxonomy, there's CFDR. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Where the companies itself have to make a statement of where they are in their journeys, but it's just so hard because it's not tangible enough at the moment. And then not to talk about the fact that some regulations are conflicting each other at the time being. So I think it's great that you guys came up with this framework. Does this a little bit show what Alyne is providing as services to its customers? Or, of course, it does a lot more.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, one of the core philosophies of Alyne is always pair content with functionality, right? So never say, here's a great process and here's an empty spreadsheet, just fill it out and go for it, right? We'll always say, this is how we think you should do it. And this is some content that we think is great. And you can disagree with both of it, or you can actually say, well, let's hit the ground running. So our approach to ESG is certainly very much in line with the core philosophy of Alyne.
Cool. That maybe brings me to a point, a question about, why should people contact you? But clearly to be aligned, that's for sure. But if you would really put it concrete as a challenge that financial institutions, I assume, has, what would be typical the challenges that they have and that you solve?
Absolutely. So obviously, chief risk officers, chief security officers, people that are responsible for ESG, for the internal control system, will find an absolutely incredibly powerful tool powered by the latest and greatest in machine learning and, essentially AI technologies, paired with some really smart content to solve a bunch of challenges. But quite frankly, because, we also we like to be at the forefront of, of these areas and think about them. And especially in ESG, we probably just, ran out ahead and see where we're at. So I also welcome anyone to contact us, have a deep discussion about, our approach, and tell us we're wrong. If we find out actually what we're doing, makes sense, then all the better. But So I look forward to having both expert conversations and, of course, also commercial conversations.
Cool. I hope that many of the listeners will pick up the phone and give you guys a call. That would be even better. Maybe one last question, if I may. Since you talked about the framework, if you would look at RegTech, well, how would you look at RegTech? I'm just joking you about the framework. That's maybe too complex here, but since you're at the foreground already yourself as a very innovative RegTech company, where will you see yourselves as an industry in 5 years?
Actually, I was having a conversation with my co-founder, Stefan, and actually another co-founder of the International RegTech Association that they founded a few years back. And we were actually just speaking about that. And I think one thing that there's this Gartner sort of a curve of innovation adoption. Yeah. That sort of, it goes to the hype of inflated expectations and then like the trough of reality. And then you get sort of like a
real deal.
I don't know, plateau of productivity or something. They have names for all of these stages, but I'm sure that we're getting close to that plateau of productivity, right? So there was the phases when I literally had this conversation when someone asked me, "So you have the RegTech? Can you show it to me, please?" So if I buy your product, then I am 100% compliant, right? So those are sort of, I would say that is the peak of inflated expectations. And then there's so there is no magic button that I can press that automatically tells me every law and regulation and what I need to do. Okay, but actually I can still digitize a lot of the processes that I'm doing a lot of manual things in today. It's very cost effective compared to some legacy tech or some manual processes. And I think that's where we are. And
which is basically the best place to be, because that means that we're in a level of maturity.
I agree. And if you look at investment, the check sizes are bigger, the players are fewer. There's certainly been thinning of the herd. And if you look at some of the bigger deals, obviously on the M&A side, Exhibit A, as well as, in further equity investments, I think, there's some very mature players that have really powerful solutions that are going to be very successful in the market, some that unfortunately didn't make it. But I'll also say across RegTech and FinTech, probably fewer new players coming up.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree with you. It felt for me like COVID has also been accelerating the whole idea around M&As, and you really had to be good in what you do, because otherwise, you probably would have struggles going forward.
Yeah,
the market has just opened up.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few factors, and I completely agree with you that COVID was a catalyst for it, right? And so one is, of course, the drive to go digital, is making the digital or digitalization services very attractive targets. Second is, on average, since the COVID crisis hit, most organizations have doubled in value. So the money has to go somewhere, and it's gone to private equity. You've got, there's just a lot of interest in building new businesses, and that's just the perfect storm of really hot M&A market.
And the fact that RegTech organizations are growing up, they also become more trustworthy. And that's also something, in my opinion, the banks need and want. It's that, like you say, perfect storm. Interesting. Well, Karl, knowing us both, we should have had this conversation with a nice cool drink, and we could have probably gone on for hours and hours and hours. But unfortunately,
if the listeners are not tired of our voices by now, you can check out an episode of the RegTech Report, our podcast, where you are our valued guest. So definitely go check that out.
Yeah, you guys are very active on podcasts, which is a good thing. So thank you very much, Karl, for this contribution in the book, but also today. Thank you to the listeners, and I all invite you to go and check out the podcast that Karl is bringing to all of us, but also maybe to listen to some of the other contributors as well. And feel free to to share, and join the community. Thank you very much, everyone.